This is ICASTnews.com, live and direct from United Nations headquarters in New York City. Is heat in the Middle East? Heat in the Middle East coming out of the UN the week that the United Nations has declared this the year of solidarity with the Palestinian people. Whether that will help the Palestinian-Israeli peace process that is being pushed, prodded, plumbed, stretched, tempted, tested by Secretary of State John Kerry remains to be seen. What is being seen, however, is that this week the Middle East is racked with death and destruction. Just now, there are reports coming in that in Afghanistan, in Kabul, outside a restaurant frequented by foreigners, a bomb went off. At least 14 people are reported dead, including the representative of the International Monetary Fund, some British officials. And the word at UN headquarters is 4 UN workers are missing, unaccounted for. Targeting places where foreigners hang out in Kabul is a kind of terrorism aimed at the world community, aimed at those who are trying to bring a measure of civility, world development, and culture to troubled Afghanistan. As NATO winds down its deployment in Afghanistan, one can expect that the Taliban and some of their backers coming out of Pakistan and coming out of tribal areas in Afghanistan will be more active and will be more engaged in these kind of activities. This week marks the 3rd anniversary of the Tunisian Revolution. The Tunisian Revolution, which stands in marked contrast to what's going on in Egypt. The Tunisian Revolution launched when a young man, a 23-year-old fruit peddler, Mohamed Bouazizi, protested by burning himself eventually to death, that he was being fined and harassed for not paying a bribe or having the right license in a provincial town in Tunisia. His friends went out to protest. The protest picked up steam and eventually led to the president then of Tunisia, Ben Ali, coming to visit him in a famous photograph where he was wrapped up after the horrific flames claimed most of his body. Ben Ali flew out of the country with a lot of gold. The young people who made the revolution triumphed. Tunisia is on its way. It hasn't solved the underlying problem of what to do, how to employ well-educated people who are without work, but they're making progress. There is a measure of democracy, secular and modern culture coming to Tunisia. In contrast, Egypt, where the military has thrown out the one elected government in Egypt. The military is putting some of the leaders of Egypt's freely elected government on trial. The military has staged a referendum still ongoing for a new constitution that probably will lead to General Sisi being elected the next leader of Egypt. It's hard to know what's exactly going to take place, but we certainly know that the people in Egypt don't have freedom of choice in some ways, and because they don't have freedom of information. The one Arab language independent source broadcasting into Egypt, Al Jazeera, has been shut down. 3 Al Jazeera journalists are in jail. Some Associated Press journalists have been temporarily detained. Now they've been released. What were they detained for? For acting supposedly to help their colleagues from Al Jazeera. Tunisia and Egypt have gone in different directions, even though we know that some of the Tahrir Square actions were inspired by events that went on in Tunisia. The Arab Spring didn't take place in the spring. It's hardly a spring, and there's a hard rain that's coming in the fall, and it looks like in that parched of places in the Middle East, Egypt, the hard rain's coming down the hardest there. Maybe the hardest rain is falling in Syria, where some 4 million people have been displaced from their homes, where the United Nations Human Rights Council, in the person of Nave Pillay, has said that there have been war crimes going on with executions and mass graves in northern Syria, where the combination of forces of the foreign minister of Russia and the Secretary of State of the United States are trying to push for a, well, they call it a transitional negotiation, but they're really pushing to have some marginal trust-building measures, exchanges of prisoners, temporary ceasefires, medical evacuations take place in Syria. Whether there will be a successful Swiss-based negotiation and conference on bringing peace or transition to Syria has many people at the United Nations and in the Kremlin and in Washington standing by with their fingers crossed about this most difficult problem that is metastasizing its difficulties all over the Middle East. For ICAStNews.com, live and direct from United Nations headquarters in New York City, for Heat in the Middle East, I'm Jonathan Sanders.